Call Don now, 682-1270. News Talk 1270 KIML.
News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. I want to thank you for joining us this morning, and we're going to go right to the phones. I believe on the line right now we should have Representative Tim Stubson. Are you there, Representative?
Yes, I am. Good morning, Don.
Good morning. Good morning. And I want to thank you for joining us this morning and kind of giving us the other side of this whole Department of Education flap. We had Cindy Hill on a few weeks ago, and in the last hour I played an interview that I did last week with Jennifer Young from the Constitution Party. So I definitely wanted to get someone from the legislature on, and I know you guys are busy, so I do want to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today.
No, I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks. And your district is the Casper area, right?
Right. I represent the Central Casper area.
Okay. I've been saying Casper all morning, but I just wanted to double check to make sure. So I got it.
You are right.
Yeah, I'm kind of new to the area, so I'm still getting used to all the names and all the districts and everything. So since I am new to the area, kind of give us an idea of how Senate File 104 got started on your end.
Well, and I often say that you've got 90 legislators and probably 120 opinions. So I think probably the genesis of every member's vote is a little bit different on this. But for me, I had worked on the Select Committee on Education Accountability for the last 2 years and really been very involved in our efforts to ensure that the vast amounts of money that the state spends on education is doing the job that it's intended to do, and that's really what the accountability initiative was aimed at. And over the couple of years that we were working on that project, it became more and more apparent that the superintendent and the Department of Education were not on board, and we really ran into a situation where we had passed a number of laws related to accountability that had some pretty significant requirements from the Department of Education, and they just weren't getting done. And as we moved through the process, it became clear that it was because it was not a priority of the department under the superintendent. The superintendent disagreed with what was done in those bills, but unfortunately she didn't disagree on the front end, she disagreed on the back end and was refusing to implement those. And to me that created a real concern that we had developed these bills to address education, to improve education, and because the superintendent disagreed with the approach, she was just refusing to follow those laws. And so to me the situation came down to, are we going to simply just wait and allow those efforts to fester for a couple of years, or are we going to do something about it? And I know the voters that I talked to, the voters that sent me to Cheyenne, sent me there knowing that I had promised to look at accountability, to look at education, and so I didn't feel like it was appropriate just to sort of turn my head for a couple of years.
Right, and I think everybody can agree that education is definitely one of the highest priorities of any government, especially at the state and local level, because that's where you get your best results.
Yeah, and I mean, you can see in Wyoming it certainly has been a priority. The amount of money that we have focused on education over the last 10 years is really unparalleled across the country. But you've also got a situation where people want to see results, and legitimately, I mean, it makes no sense to pour more money into an education system if it doesn't equal results, and that's really what the concern and the focus has been for the legislature over the past few years.
So once you identified the problem, and you identified that the problem was coming from the superintendent's office in particular, did you consider maybe, instead of stripping the office of the powers, did you consider actually impeaching Cindy Hill?
I don't recall really any discussion of that, any serious discussion of that during the session, and part of it was, we weren't dealing with complete information. We certainly knew that there were the issues with the refusal to follow the accountability provisions. We also knew that there were serious problems with misappropriations of funds, spending monies in ways they weren't approved to be spent, because we had dealt with that in the Appropriations Committee for a year prior to last session. So a lot of the issues that were the basis of 104 were not new issues. But impeachment is something wholly and entirely different, and in fact, even now with the report that has come out, I would say that any talk of impeachment at this point is entirely speculative.
Right. Oh, yeah, I understand. I was just wondering if the thought had come across to maybe try to get someone new in there that might do something as opposed to completely changing the powers of the office. But I guess you figured that changing the duties of the office would be a better way to go about it.
Well, and that's one of the real points of confusion that's been out there, and I think it's because of the rhetoric that's been swirling that a lot of people I talk to, my friends and family, are confused. They think what we did is sort of the functional equivalent of an impeachment, which is not the case at all. What we did is sort of, rather than ignoring the will of the people, the vote of the people, I think what we did honored it as much as we possibly could and deal with the problem. And that is, you rearrange the duties. That's what the legislature has done for over 100 years in this state, and so what we did is we stepped in and we took those programs that we felt were were the sources of the problems, which were primarily in the Department of Education, and moved them to somewhere else under other leadership. What we didn't do, though, is impact those constitutional powers of the superintendent. And you've seen over the 4 months since we passed the bill, I've been to State Land Investment Board meetings, State Capitol Building Commission meetings, all those sorts of things. And the superintendent's there. She's at her seat. She's advocating her position, and she's making her votes. I think the last 4 months have borne out the fact that we did not do what is the functional equivalent of a impeachment. What we did is what was within our powers and readjusted responsibilities in government.
Okay, so it's one of those things where you changed some of the duties that were directly being affected by the duties that the superintendent wasn't actually doing.
Yeah, I think you can look at it as we rang the bell, because what a lot of people don't realize is the Department of Education for over 50 years of its history was not led by the Superintendent of Public Instruction. There was a Commissioner of Education. There were a number of other positions that led that department, but it wasn't until 1969 that the superintendent actually was moved in as the administrator of that department, and that was done by legislative action. So what we did is really unrang that bell, and we took the office of the superintendent, which was a separately budgeted office and has been, and we took that out of the Department of Education, and the superintendent took that budget. She took those personnel, other than a couple of people, and we left that intact.
So this is something that this office hasn't always had had all of these powers then.
Exactly. I mean, this was a situation that was changed by the legislature 30 years ago, and you can maybe call it a 30-year experiment. But and you look, it's really interesting. You look at the Department of Education, and there's really not very many state dollars in there. The vast majority of that budget comes from federal grant programs and federal dollars. And so, this was really, as it had evolved over time, the superintendent had become sort of the master of allocating these federal grants, and that, in my mind, that almost distracts from what the constitutional intent of the office is, which is to be an advocate for education for the state of Wyoming.
Oh, so on the side of the legislature, you're saying that this really should pass constitutional muster then?
Yeah, the Supreme Court will speak on it, but I don't really have any doubts that it will. The district court, when it looked at the issues, and when the superintendent tried to get a preliminary injunction, made the finding that she was unlikely to win on the merits of this case, and I think that's right, because it makes no sense that we can move those duties to the superintendent, but then we can't then move them somewhere else, and that's what we did with Senate File 104.
Right, and now you are an attorney by trade, right?
I am.
So I would assume that you would have a fairly good understanding of the Constitution of the state then.
Well, I think all legislators do, and we all take an oath to uphold it. And so, I wouldn't claim any more expertise than anybody else in the legislature, but we certainly, it's something that I look at all the time and measure laws against all the time.
So what's the response been when you go out and talk to your constituents and, people around the state? What's the response been?
What I've found, it really differs in different parts around the state, and I've certainly had, I had friends and family that were upset about 104 and took me to task on it. But when I sit down and explain what we actually did, and we kind of move beyond the slogans of you took our vote away and some of those things, and we explain what we did and why we did it, the vast majority of folks that I've talked to feel pretty comfortable with where we're at when we're done, because the key is that when I ran for election, when I was talking to voters, I didn't have anybody tell me that if I saw the mismanagement of tax dollars, if I saw misappropriation of tax dollars, if I saw an abuse of a position and ignoring existing laws, that I would just turn my head and walk away. And when they understand that those were the things that spawned Senate File 104, then usually people are pretty understanding of what we did. Yeah,
and I'll be honest. Like I said at the beginning of the interview, I'm new to the area, so I didn't know a whole lot about it. I was told, when I first started here, I was told a little bit about it, and I've heard the other side of the story, but this is the first time I'm hearing some of this stuff, and it makes a little bit more sense.
Well, and I understand why people were upset, because if you're told that the legislative body is essentially overriding your vote and ignoring the vast majority of what the state of Wyoming did, that is offensive. And it's one of those things that if you describe, if you listen to the description of 104 and you listen to the rhetoric, who on earth would vote for that thing? But in this case, of course, you had 2/3 of the Senate vote for it and almost 2/3 of the House. And the reason was because it was what I thought was a logical and measured approach to some real problems in the Department of Education.
Yeah, and it definitely, like you said, I guess there was a lot of misconceptions. So I'm glad, I'm glad we're able to get you on the air to kind of clear some of those up for maybe some of our listeners. So what's next?
Well, that's the big question mark. We, of course, the report from the governor's inquiry team came out, and much of what's in that report, I'll tell you, was sort of swirling around, and we had some of it actually we had some hearings on, but the scope of some of the budgetary issues and those things, the financial mismanagement that are cataloged in the report, at least I wasn't aware of, and I don't think most of the House was. So I would expect that there will be some portion of the legislature that wants to look further at that, and I think we probably have a responsibility to do that, because the report doesn't draw any conclusions. All it does is it reports, kind of summarizes interviews and provides documentation, but it doesn't provide any conclusions. We've got to get to a point where we can draw some conclusions so that we can ensure that, going forward, tax money is spent the way it's intended to be spent, and programs are managed the way they're intended to be managed.
Okay, yeah, and this has actually become somewhat of a national story. I've seen this on national websites, and it really doesn't make the state look good. So I'm glad that there's still it's an ongoing process to try to get this kind of cleared up.
And I think, like I say, there is a lot of discussion going on among legislators and the governors involved in these conversations to try to figure out what is the best way to tackle it and what makes the most sense. And ultimately, anything that we decide on has to be something that is in the best interest of the state, and that in the long run actually ends up in the state government being run in a better way.
Now, I know you said that the talk of impeachment is speculative, but is it something that is an option?
It certainly is always an option, but there's a couple of hurdles you have to get over to get to that point. One is, was there an impeachable offense? And that's why you have to look a little bit further at this report. But even beyond that, if you reach a point that says, there's a basis for an impeachment, you've got to, at least I as a legislator have to reach a point that says that's in the best interest of the state. If we get to that point and we also conclude that we've dealt with the majority of the issues through the restructuring under 104, we recognize that we've got an election coming up in about 2 years, then maybe it doesn't in a year, then maybe it doesn't make sense to take that extra step. So those are all sort of things you have to weigh in the calculation.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I mean, it might be just a situation where maybe the restructuring has kind of made it so that no more, I hate to say damage, but I mean no more damage could be done.
Or at least it's minimized, and you certainly have at least the federal funds. They remain in the Department of Education, and if you look at the report, that's one of the big concerns, is that federal funds were being used for things that they were never intended to be used, and that has real consequences in the context of future grants for the state of Wyoming. And so that's now outside. The superintendent's no longer administering those funds, and so that may be a conclusion that you reach, is that we've eliminated the risk of further damage.
Now, I guess the next step on the other side of this is the legal battle. Is that something that should be resolved before the next election?
I would think so. I mean, it's in front of the Supreme Court right now, so I would imagine we should hear in the next few months from them on their conclusions regarding the constitutionality, and that's a good thing. It's that's what the court's there for, is to determine and whether we acted lawfully or not. So hopefully we'll hear from them shortly, and that part of it will be resolved.
Oh, so the courts around here move a little bit faster then.
Well, and the parties have, I think, worked to move this along. They moved it directly from the district court up to the Supreme Court. So hopefully a decision will come a little quicker because they did that. Oh, okay. And I know
you're fairly busy, but are there any other maybe closing thoughts you might have that you might want to share with everybody?
Well, I would just go back to the point that the reason that Senate File 104 came about were very real concerns, and I think those concerns have been borne out by the report. But it is important to realize what we did and what we didn't do. And what we did do is we preserved all those constitutional rights and authorities and powers of the superintendent. She continues to have her voice. She continues to have a budget. She continues to vote on all the state boards that she sat on. And what we did not do is rob her of those authorities, but we took steps to try to protect the state, to try to protect our taxpayer dollars, and ensure they're being spent in the way that we said they should. So, if we can have a discussion along those lines, but we need to talk about the actual facts and not just the rhetoric.
Okay, there you go. And I want to thank you again for joining us and kind of giving us a little bit of your time and giving us the other side of the story. I've been anxious to kind of get somebody on from the legislature, so I'm glad you were able to join us today.
Well, I appreciate it. I know we, as a legislature, have not done a good job of explaining the why and the what of what was done. So I appreciate the opportunity to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And of course, next time something like this comes up, I'll make sure to have you on the show again. We'll hopefully talk to you again soon.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much. That was Representative Tim Stubson from the Casper district, giving us the legislature side of the story. I'm glad we were able to get him on, and we ran a little bit long there. Let's go to take a short break. News Talk 1270 KIML Don Carpenter Show. We'll be right back.
No crazy conspiracies, just good local talk. Don Carpenter on News Talk 12. Call Don right now, 682-1270.
News Talk 1270, KIML. Don Carpenter Show. I want to thank Representative Stubson for calling in and spending some time with us this morning, kind of give us the other side of the story. And, of course, if you have any comments about any of this Senate File 104 stuff, the Cindy Hill stuff, 682-1270, 682-1270. We'll take a few minutes, maybe take some comments on that before we take our next break. This is actually something I wanted to share with you last week, but I wanted to kind of get the word of everybody involved before I kind of shared it with you. And it's just some of the stuff that was included in the report to the governor. And I'm not going to read you the whole story. This is from the Casper Tribune, but I want to share with you some of the stuff that was in the report, because there's some weird things going on. And I didn't really want to ask the representative about it because it would be gossipy, I guess. And it really isn't really the point of the law, so to speak, on either side. But I figured I'd share some of the stranger things that I found really, really unusual. I mean, there were a few misused funds things. I mean, that kind of stuff happens from time to time. I'm not going to pass judgment on that. There's a weird one with the state aircraft, though. On September 12th of last year, I believe, Cindy Hill flew to Jackson aboard the state's airplane. With her, there were a number of state employees who later said they were unsure why they had been asked to fly along. While in Jackson, Hill reportedly attended a lunch at a country club, while the others continued to wonder why they had been invited. Later, those who flew along found their budgets charged for the flight. One employer who asked for documents to justify the expense never received any. A few quotes, Hill routinely subsidized her trips around the state on the government's airplane by essentially taking money from various parts of the state's education budget, the investigation found. So, I mean, that was a strange one. There were some weird things going on in the workplace. In a particularly harrowing set of interviews, employees described setting up code words to protect fellow employees afraid for their safety. And this is one I really have no idea what's going on with it, but apparently young pretty girls they set up code words to protect these young pretty girls against a threat, but the threat was never defined in the report. So nobody really knows what it is. It's just kind of a vague thing. One employee brought bear spray to work. Another brought a baseball bat as a joke to carry around the women's bathroom, but admitted other women carried the bat with them to the restroom as a genuine safety measure. And this is just weird stuff. And I'll be honest, I really have no idea what's going on with it. Let's go to the phones. News Talk 1270, KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air.
Hello.
Yes. How are you doing this morning?
Fine. Hey, let's listen to the program. And, I was thinking that, she misappropriated funds. And, they say that that's a polite way of saying that she was a thief of the taxpayer money. And, if somebody goes, let's say, with a box cutter and goes to a 7-Eleven or some store and and says, give me your money so I can misappropriate funds,
well,
they go to jail.
Well, I don't think they're actually accusing her of using the money for her own uses other than the airplane thing. I think the misappropriation is generally she's spending it on the things that she wants to spend it on instead of what the legislature wants to spend it on. But it's
that's what the thieves do.
But it's still education related, though. I mean, I don't.
Well, that's what.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Oh,
hey,
yeah.
It's thieving. We are taxpayers, okay? If they misappropriate funds, that is thievery in my eyes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think you could definitely make the case, especially if it's being used for things that are completely unrelated.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, though, is that if there's rules, regulations on how to spend that money, and they go against it, that is willfully going against the will of the people that made that ruling. So that is thievery. Another thing is if she got cut her responsibilities, she should be cut her salary. And I didn't hear anything said about cutting her salary, because now she's not doing much as she was, or supposedly she should have been doing. So the salary should be cut so that they can hire somebody else to do that job, and that's going to cost extra money, but she should pay for that mistake.
No, that's an interesting thing. I haven't heard. I mean, I've heard a lot of people talk about this, but I haven't heard anybody bring up that idea. It's definitely an interesting take on it.
Well, when you hire somebody, you give them their job description and say, okay, now these are the things that you have to do in your job, and the salary comes with these responsibilities. So when you start cutting responsibilities, you should start cutting the salary.
Yeah, or I mean, and that's actually one of the reasons why I brought up impeachment before I even mentioned the bill is if things were this bad, why not impeach in the first place?
Absolutely. Get rid of the dead wood. Get something fresh in there,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
I agree with you.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm not picking a side on this. I'm just saying that if things were that bad, maybe impeachment might have been something to look into first.
Right. You see, and that's another misappropriation. If you're paying somebody money when they've had part of their duties cut, that's another fragrant use of the taxpayers' money. God. I mean, it's rotten all the way to the core. It just makes you sick when you're out here working your butt off to provide for your family and that stuff, and then you have to pay taxes and that stuff, and then you hear this crap. Excuse English. I'm going, whoa, this is way overboard. Somebody really needs to grab a hold of the whole situation here and go, whoa.
Gonna pull the whole thing back, right?
Yeah. That's the Wyoming way, and that isn't the way it's happening here. And it's scary.
Yeah. Hopefully they can kind of come to some kind of agreement that'll at least ensure wise use of the funds that they have.
Well, yeah. But there should be accountability there, too.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, if you say, okay, well, I'm going to use this, golly, I've got $2,000 to do this, but golly, I think this is related. I'm going to, you do that stuff without any responsibility, without getting your fingers whacked or anything like that. What are you going to do? Are you going to stop? No. And so what kind of thing is that? I mean, it's just crazy. I just can't understand how they let it go on and on and on. It's like when you're a little kid, you say, okay, she said, your mom says, keep out of the cookie jar, and you're in the cookie jar. What'd she do? She slaps your hand and says, no, you don't, Johnny.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that doesn't happen anymore. It's just like weird. You get it's kind of like, okay, you get your doctorate degree, and then all of a sudden you've got this open ticket to steal or misappropriate or whatever you want to call it, and nothing happens to you. You know, it's just like, oh, well, you know.
Yeah. I want to thank you for the call. I hate to cut you short, but the lines are filling up here, so I want to give everybody a chance. Excellent points. Let's okay. News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air.
Don, hi.
Good. How are you doing this morning?
A little fair to middle one, but the biggest problem I had with this entire thing is that we, the people, voted Cindy in there to do her job. We, the people, didn't vote the legislature or the governor to go do her job. If she was doing something that was grossly negligent, then she should have been impeached, not stripped of powers of the superintendent the way they tried to do her. Because then who's to say, next time anybody else does something, well, let's just, walk in there and take her job away and any power she has, but then it doesn't matter what the people say.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, that's why I asked about impeachment first, because I think that might have been, at least in my mind, that might have been a better way to go about it. But then again, I don't know if they knew about all of these things going on that were, maybe not impeachable yet.
Some of the stuff I don't really see. She probably burned somebody's crackers a little bit, but it's not like she ran off with the money like a lot of people do. She still used it for our education fund. They didn't do it the way other people wanted her to use it for, and I think that's where the problem came from.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody's accusing her of using the funds for personal use.
Well, they say misappropriation. That's what they say, when somebody steals something. They say that they're not calling her a thief, but they're using words that make people think thief.
Oh yeah, I mean, the last caller, I mean, he definitely was pretty strong of that opinion.
Well, we all are, kind of like a Bill Clinton.
Well, yeah.
I did not have sex with that woman. Yes, he did, but he yelled at no enough that people started thinking he didn't. In the light of overwhelming facts. Oh yeah,
I mean, and even later he admitted it, but people still to this day still don't believe it.
It's just, that's the way it's being spun here, and the people that don't like Ms. Hill are spinning it rather negative on her. And if they really want to do what the people want, or the will of the people here, then they'll look, our legislators and our governor need to open up that little book called the Wyoming Constitution. And if they want to get rid of her with that. Don't get rid of her by voting your own little rules in, because I didn't really see in the book where they could just go ahead and strip her of her powers and leave her in place. Because if they do that to her, then every other position you have to vote on somebody to do, that's going to happen. Oh, you PO'd the governor this week? We're going to strip away your powers and make you do nothing. Or you made somebody in the legislature mad? Well, we're going to do this to you. Her position should have been held safe and solid by the fact that we voted her in. And I shouldn't say safe and solid, but it should have kept the stuff that the governor tried safe from that. And if she really did do something so grossly negligent, then she should have been impeached or fired, as we call it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't disagree with you in principle. I mean, I've said a couple times that I haven't picked a side on this one yet, but
me personally don't think she did nothing wrong. She did everything within the purview of her office.
Well, it kind of looks like that's not the case. That's for sure.
Well, because you list people who keep you on misappropriation, and she did this and she did that. She may be done a couple little things, but overall, I think she did what was best for the state. You got a lot of people that say they do what they think is the best for, but it's not really the best for the state; it's the best for them.
Well, and that's the idea of having elected officials as well. I mean, they're supposed to do what they think is the best, not necessarily what the constituents think. I mean, that's the whole idea of a republic, is you elect people to make those decisions for you.
Don, I'm going to lose you in about a second, so I'll jump off.
Okay, thanks a lot. And we might have one more call. I don't know. It's been on hold for a little bit, so let's give it a shot anyway. News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air.
Yeah, Don, the reason they didn't impeach her is they didn't have nothing to impeach her on. And the reason they're mad is for the last 30 years they've been pumping all this money into the education system. As they like to brag, they've been putting more money than 90% of the country into the education system, and it's not been improving. So Cindy Hill came in there and shook things up and started taking the money that they were using to pay for empty buildings sitting around and using it for actual education purposes instead of paying for empty real estate, and they got mad.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you knew a little bit more about what Cindy's been doing. So that's what she was doing then.
Oh yeah, they've been paying for empty buildings for years, putting all this money into education, and the education ain't been improving. So we got to change something up. Obviously money ain't the answer. And in my opinion, the Republicans in this state that are elected into the Congress and the Senate, they're more aligned with the Democrats than they are with the Republicans. They're acting just like the Democrats in Washington, in my opinion.
Yeah, and we've been here a good share of that. I mean, Jennifer Young from the Constitution Party was saying. She didn't quite say it in those words, but it was kind of the same thing. They were trying to federalize the education system here in the state.
Yeah. All right. Well, you have a good day.
Yep. Thanks for the call. Excellent calls, and we ran really long in that break. So let's take a short break, and we'll come back and we'll kind of wrap up the talk of the Cindy Hill stuff. We'll kind of wrap this up for this hour. News Talk 1270, KIML, Don Carpenter Show. We'll be back in just a few.
For the latest on the show, follow Don on Twitter @TheDonCarpenter. News Talk 1270, KIML. You're listening to Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270, KIML.
News Talk 1270, KIML, Don Carpenter Show. I want to thank you for joining us this morning, and looks like we have a call. Let's go to the phones again. News Talk 1270, KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air. Hello, you still with us? Okay, try giving us a call back. It looks like we might have lost you. Sometimes when you call in during the breaks, it kind of loses the call every once in a while. But we still have a couple of minutes, 682-1270, 682-1270 if you want to sound off on the Cindy Hill stuff. In the next hour, I want to talk about the Paula Deen story. So we'll get into something a little bit different in the next hour, something that's not politics related, which is always a good change up. And, we'll kind of cover that, 682-1270, 682-1270. We have about 2 minutes left if you want to sound off on the Cindy Hill story. Like I said, I don't really have a side on this. And a lot of these issues that we talk about, especially the local stuff, where, I haven't been here long enough to kind of develop opinions on a lot of this stuff. I find it interesting to have both sides of the story on because, there are people out there that agree with both sides of the story. I mean, this is one of those things, and I understand how local politics can get personal really quickly, and I try to avoid a lot of that. Okay, looks like we might have the call back. Let's try this one more time. News Talk 1270, KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air.
Hey, Don Carpenter.
Hey, how you doing today? Yeah, hey, how you doing today, buddy?
I'm doing okay, traveling as usual. Two things. First off, I want to make an announcement that the free Veterans Breakfast will be tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock at the Senior Citizen Center.
Okay, yeah, the Veterans Breakfast is tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock at the Senior Center?
At the Senior Citizen Center, you betcha.
Okay. Actually, I'm going to write that down, and I'll make sure to plug it again before the end of the show.
Yeah, it's easy to remember, Don. It's always the last Tuesday of the month.
Oh, okay. I guess it is the last Tuesday already, isn't it? Well,
yeah.
This
funny how time flies when you're having fun with good friends, huh?
Yeah, definitely. I don't even remember this month starting. That's how quick it's gone.
Also, one quick quip on the Cindy Hill thing. When we had an election 2 years ago, we had a really good fully qualified candidate run against Cindy Hill. Only problem he had was he had a D behind his name. So with all this flap going on, I told people 2 years ago, I said, you know what? You're going to be sorry for the decision you made before long, and the chickens are coming home to roost on them.
Yeah, well, I will say one thing. I think the next time people might be more willing to take a little bit closer look, hopefully.
I've only been here since 1978, and it hasn't changed a whole lot yet, Don.
Well, yeah, well, I don't know. Hopefully things won't have to get too bad before people take a, and I'm not telling anybody who to vote for. I'm just saying take a look.
Yeah. Well, like I said, they had a good qualified candidate. The only problem he had was he had a D behind his name.
Yeah. I guess that doesn't fly in this neck of the state anyway.
Well, it pretty well doesn't fly in any neck of the state.
Yeah.
We're better red than dead around here.
Yeah, it's definitely. Democrats are definitely an endangered species, and actually that reminds me, I'm going to try to get a hold of the Democrats and try to have them on the show again. I had them on the first week. I'm going to try to get a hold of them and see what they've been up to.
I'll tell you what, I'll get a hold of Mary Throne. She's a legislator from down south, and I'll have her call you. Oh,
I'd appreciate that.
Because she is kind of a spokesman for the Democrats.
Oh, okay, yeah. I had a guy from the state party on. I believe he's the director of the party, but
yeah, Pete Kosar, he's the chairman.
Yeah, Pete. Yeah,
but Mary Throne is a legislator, so I'll get a hold of her today and have her give you a shout.
Oh yeah. I'd appreciate that.
All righty, bud.
Hey, thanks a lot.
You bet. You have a good day unless you decide to do otherwise.
Well, I'm going to go home and sleep when I'm done here. So that's a good day for me.
Yeah, them 6 o'clockers are a bear, ain't they?
Oh well, it's more like 4 o'clock for me. But you got to get ready for the show.
Yeah, it takes a while to comb your hair.
Oh yeah, it definitely does for me. Hey,
alrighty, Don.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Take care. And with that, I want to apologize to the other caller who called in. Call back after the break, and if you call back during the break, we'll go right to you after the news. News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. We'll be back in just a few.
From Washington to Cheyenne to right here in Gillette, Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.
Don Carpenter Show. I want to thank you for joining us this morning. It's been a pretty busy morning. Had a lot of calls, which is always a good thing. And if you want to call in, wow, that was pretty quick. As soon as I mention the word calls, the phone rings. That's a good thing. Let's go right to the phones. News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air.
Hey, Don. Tom Lubnau.
Oh, hey, Tom. How are you doing today?
Good, and you?
Oh, not too bad. I was actually going to send you an email later on today. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I caught a piece of some of the debate driving between appointments and wanted to just fill your folks in on some of the law because, there's a lot of debate about the Constitution. I thought perhaps I should let you know what the Constitution says on the issue of the Superintendent of Public Instruction.
Sure. And we actually talked to Representative Stubson at the top of the last hour, but he didn't really go into detail about the constitutional part of it.
Sure. Let me just read you a couple provisions of the Constitution. Article 7, Section 1 of our Constitution says, the legislature shall provide for the establishment and maintenance of a complete and uniform system of public instruction, embracing free elementary schools of every needed kind and grade, a university with such technical and professional departments as the public good may require and the means of the state allow, and such other institutions as may be necessary. And then there's been a whole series of litigation about that that says that essentially the legislature is in charge of the public schools. Then, way back in Article 7, Section 14, it says the general supervision of the public schools shall be entrusted to the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, whose powers and duties shall be prescribed by law. The powers and duties prescribed by law, of course, means that the legislature describes those powers and duties. So that's what the Constitution says, is number one, that the legislature is in charge of the education system, and that the powers and duties of the Superintendent of Public Instruction shall be prescribed by law. And so that's why the legislature acted. But let's talk about just one other thing, and then I got to go. And that is that when one elected official is not performing, it's incumbent upon the other branches of government, because we don't have absolute power in this state or in this country. And so if the president is doing things the president shouldn't do, it's incumbent upon the Congress to rein them in, and it creates a sort of a constitutional crisis. Well, there are 91 other elected officials who were elected who had a duty to education. There's 30 senators, there's 60 representatives, and there's the governor. And so when the superintendent was acting out, it became by not following the law, and we knew that she was using federal funds dedicated to special needs children and redirecting them to a program that had very little to do with special needs programs. We understood that she was using the state airplane to fly up to Jackson to private business meetings or up to Cody to political functions and charging the federal government for that. And there's something that you need to know about that. When you abuse those federal funds, and this is a person, of course, who campaigned on, I'm standing between you and the federal government, who was willing to take federal funds to do with what she wanted them. It places the state of Wyoming at risk, and there's a chance that we'll have to pay all of those federal funds back, plus interest and penalties, because we didn't use the federal funds according to those federal grants. So what happened is these other 91 officials, as a check and balance, said, you're not performing your duty. We're going to change the system so that you will perform your duty, or somebody will. So that's what happened, and that's the motivation. And I will tell you that it wasn't the legislature or the governor who chose this agenda. We didn't choose to break the law, and we didn't choose to do those things that are detailed in that report. They were thrust upon us, and we have a responsibility to the education system to make sure that it runs, and it runs as best as it can possibly run. And when each of us went door to door campaigning a couple years ago, folks told us that education was important to them. And when you have a superintendent who disregards, and I hear all this stuff about rattling cages and making people perform their jobs, when you read that report, you find out that that's not true. It just isn't. I mean, she may have thought she was rattling cages, but people weren't performing their jobs. And it got so abusive that we lost a little over half, as I understand it, of the professionals, which is okay, except for you think of the brain drain, the highly qualified doctorate level folks that don't work for the state of Wyoming, and the rebuilding we have to do, and the data collection that isn't getting done, so that we can make good decisions as a state, and so we can find out what works and share that with other schools. Those things weren't happening, and they need to happen, and that's what the demands were. So it was a check and balance on those issues. So those were a couple things I wanted to clear up.
Oh, sure. I mean, do you have time for just one short question?
Sure.
Now, this is actually something I asked Representative Stubson as well. Was impeachment considered before changing the entire office, just for one person? I mean, maybe just the idea of getting rid of the person that's doing the things that you don't like and not changing the entire office, or is that Was that just not an option because you didn't have any evidence of impeachable offenses?
We didn't think it. We suspected a lot. See, you've got to understand that there was an atmosphere of secrecy and intimidation at the department. There was one day when I called the superintendent and said, "Superintendent, I've met with these whistleblowers and they've told me these things." And she called all of the employees right after that and lined them up in the hallway and had them interviewed by a personnel administrator from another department, finding out, well, what did you tell Representative Lubnau about things that are happening over here? And so, there are some pretty bizarre descriptions in the report of being lined up in the hallway and getting called into the room one by one of employees. And so we weren't getting lots and lots of information out and didn't have detailed information of the impeachable things. We knew that we had 28 misclassified positions, 26 or 28, where they were being paid for out of the wrong budget with the wrong funds. A good example would be the videographer who was videotaping out of education assessment funds the legislative debates on Senate File 104 so that the superintendent's folks knew who they needed to lobby and who they didn't need to lobby for debate on Senate File 104. And so there are a lot of really rational, good reasons why we couldn't do impeachment, and most of it was around our inability to get all the information we needed. I still don't know if impeachment's appropriate. We have a system where all of these shenanigans were allowed to go on for almost 2 years. And we need to look at our system, because if these kind of shenanigans can happen without checks and balances, then we need to fix that. And, Senate File 104 is a work in progress. I will grant that. There'll probably be some changes this next legislative session to address concerns of the public. But given the situation that we had at the time we had, that things were stalled, that they weren't moving forward, that we were getting kind of muddled, non-professional results out of a department we spend $1.3 billion per biennium for operations, and then about another $1 billion for capital construction. So we're looking at $2.2 to $2.3 billion of expenditures in the state of Wyoming, and we weren't getting the kind of results that we wanted for it. And I think everyone can agree that the highest quality education our kids can get is the most important thing. And when you have a superintendent who says things that people want to hear, but then does something completely different, that's a concern to us.
Oh yeah, and actually, the point that you made that a system that would allow something like this to happen is a broken system and needed to be adjusted a little bit. That's the best explanation I've heard so far of why the legislation over impeachment. That's a excellent way to put it.
Well, and we've had a broken system. It's interesting, and I'm still. One of your listeners actually called me over the weekend and told me that we had exactly this same situation or a similar situation happen like this in 1968. And you know what the legislature did then in 1969? They created the Department of Education, and they subtracted and added duties for the Superintendent of Public Instruction. And so here we are 50 years later, 40-some years later, with a similar kind of situation where the legislature adjusted duties. Now, we had a report in 1984 that said our system was broken, because you see, in Wyoming, there's a misunderstanding that the Superintendent of Public Instruction has a great deal of powers. The management of your schools, the day-to-day management of your schools, the teachers who's hired and fired, and what the textbooks are handled by your local school district. Your school board, acting through their superintendent, manages the day-to-day operations of each of the individual schools. And the legislature is in favor of that local control, so they hand out money in a block grant, where each school district it used to be that local resources funded the schools. There was a series of constitutional challenges, and now Campbell County and Sublette County pretty much support the rest of the schools in the state with the tax dollars that are taken from these counties and reallocated. And they're reallocated in a block grant. And how those monies are spent are up to your local school districts, your local school boards. And your teacher development is all handled locally. And constitutionally, the State Board of Education or the legislature can't pick the textbooks. In Texas, it's a big deal to get on the Texas School Book Commission because they set the curriculum. But those curriculums are now handled locally, which I think is a better process. The standards, the education standards, and you hear a lot of debate about the Common Core standards, those are adopted by the Wyoming State Board of Education, not the superintendent. The superintendent's a member of that board, but the Board of Education adopts those education standards. So essentially what the superintendent's job is data collection and then some elements of professional development. But the professional development, we spend about, I think we have $10 million that we give to the local school districts for education development statewide. Plus, we give them another $20 million for instructional facilitators to teach teachers to teach in each of the individual districts. So we fund very well, to the tune of about $30 million, educational development in the schools, and then we let the local school boards control what education development they need to do. So I don't know. That was a long answer to a short question.
Oh, no, that's quite all right. I'm learning a lot about this. So and I think it's definitely good to get this side of the story out because
it's not really a side of it. I think everybody's interested in high quality education.
Yeah.
I mean, it isn't legislature versus the superintendent. There's a lot of people who like to couch it like that. What the legislature is looking for is the best quality education we can get for the kids. And if people stand in the way of that, we're going to change the system so that we can get to the best quality education for the kids and not have a lot of shenanigans going on. And that's what we're afraid of now, is that there were a lot of shenanigans going on.
And I will say I'm hearing a lot of this for the first time. So and I'm sure there's probably a lot of people out there that are also hearing a lot of this for the first time. So, I'm glad you're able to kind of clear a lot of this up for us.
Well, the legislature in Wyoming has 90 different points of view. There's 30 different senators and 60 different representatives. And we don't have a press office. We don't have a public information officer. We don't have statewide email lists. We don't have spin machines that can go out there and spin issues because we have 90 different voices, and that's the way it should be. So whenever it's the legislature dealing with a statewide elected official, early on when I was called in because this bill had been brought forward, one of the folks who's down there, who's an advisor of mine and somebody I trust a lot, said, look, in the PR battle against a statewide elected official, the legislature always loses because you have so many different voices. And the statewide elected official always goes out there and spins and has one voice and a spin machine behind the voice and an email list or a mailing list that goes statewide. And all you have is just your individual voice. And in Wyoming, legislators don't have individual staff. I mean, we are our own staff. So in a spin battle, there's just no way for us to come out other than for folks like me to pick up the phone and call you every now and then. but we also have our day jobs we have to do to earn a living so that we can call you every now and then.
Well, yeah, you gotta pay that Verizon bill sooner or later.
So, and I probably better get off the phone unless you have any other quick questions. I got to go to work.
Oh no! I don't want to keep you. I don't want to keep you from your paying job. So, hopefully, we'll get to see you in here in studio sometime soon.
All right. Well, great. Good to talk to you, Don.
Yep. Thank you. That was Speaker Tom Lubnau. It's always good to have him on the phone, and the lines were lit up. Let's see if anybody's still with us. News Talk 1270 KIML. You're on the air. Okay. Hello, yes, you're on the air.
You know, it would have been nice to have been able to ask Tom Lubnau some questions. I'd first like to thank him for coming on and giving us a brief history. But first off, I would like to say integrity. And that was something that lacked through this whole system, was a system of honesty. You know, first we're told this has nothing to do with the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Cindy Hill, and now it has everything to do with her. You know, the inability to impeach, but yet now they're able to find all these faults that she was able to do while she was in her tenure. And third, when they speak of the best education, and we all agree that we want good education for our kids, the problem that I see is all they do is create more bureaucracy. You know, get it back to the local school levels. Let them decide how best to educate our kids. Get the parents involved as best as you can, because education, ultimately, is not the responsibility of a government. It's the responsibility of the student. It's the responsibility of the parents. And the problem when you see education like this is not too many people understand that it is their own responsibility. You know, you can't make me learn. I've got to want to learn. And so with the systems that we have, creating the bureaucracy that we have, all we've been able to do is teach kids your responsibility. You know, we haven't shown them, we haven't told them, hey, you know, if you want to learn and prosper, you know, you're going to have to take that initiative. And we put a lot of the blame on the teachers, and then some of that blame falls on the state legislature. But most of all, my biggest complaint about this whole issue was there was no honesty coming from the state legislature, Tom Lubnau included. Probably the biggest advocate of nefarious activity, I think, came from the state legislature. You know, if you want us on your side, then get us involved. Don't lie to us. And give us the facts. Don't sit there and say, hey, this is not about Cindy Hill, and then come about and say, oh, well, it's all about Cindy Hill. She's the worst human being that could have ever been superintending. You know, it jerks my chain. You know, if we have to change the system, fine, let's change it. But don't lie to me.
Okay, yeah. I mean that's it's definitely. And the one thing you mentioned that I definitely would like to touch on is I think the idea of keeping the control as far local, you know, as far down the chain as possible to try to keep control of the education system and as local as possible. And yeah, I mean, it's it made some good points, and I promise the next time we have Speaker Lubnau in studio, we'll take some calls on this, because I know everybody has some questions. I didn't know he was going to speak for 20 minutes, or I would have asked him if he wanted to take calls. I thought it was just going to be a quick 5-minute call. So next time we have him in, make sure you call in, and you can sound off all that, and we'll get his response. And the lines are lit. Let's go to the next one. Okay, okay. News Talk 1270 KIML, Don Carpenter Show. You're on the air.
Well, the first thing you're going to find out is Lubnau don't like taking calls from the listeners. He don't like it. But I was going to just make the comment: if they didn't like the way Cindy Hill was running the education department, what are they going to do when she's the next governor of Wyoming?
Well, I guess that's one of those bridges you have to cross when you get to it, I guess, right?
Yeah, she's going to be the next governor of Wyoming, I think.
Well, anything could happen. I mean, I don't know enough about the situation to give an intelligent response to that, but I mean, okay. And with that, we ran really long. Let's take a short break. When we come back, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about this. Maybe we'll move on. We'll see how the winds blow. News Talk 1270, KIML, Don Carpenter Show.
He likes turtles too. Don Carpenter on News Talk 1270 KIML.